Okay, good morning. Let's move on another step, another parish, the last parish for my ministry, the seventh. So in Jewish tradition I think 7 was always important, and so in my case 7 was important too, which was now a new parish being formed, one parish out of 2, which had been Maclagan Parish, and the other the Goombungee one. Between the 2 of them we had 6 congregations initially, but we came to the time now when that would be reduced to 3 before it was handled into parishes.
Could we just say this parish now is in Queensland, just outside of Toowoomba, and as you're starting to tell the story, that's where it is.
And the pastor who had just left before I came knew that he would be leaving soon. He was reaching the age of his retirement, so it came with retirement there and the calling of a new pastor. I guess I realise that whenever that kind of change takes place, of congregations and parishes, any reformation at those stages is quite a telling period. Some of it we realise ourselves, but I realise that in most cases members who have been faithful, loyal members of a parish feel it still more when that kind of change had to be made. I guess the public could see that the shift of population was
happening.
was at work. The pressure on smaller dairy farmers and our congregation, certainly at Maclagan Way, were made up of quite small dairy herds of maybe 80 cows or something like that. And that was becoming very, very difficult to handle with the whole handling of the milk business, the dairy business, and I guess we could foresee, and obviously the members could foresee, the need to make some big church changes too, as far as pastors, personnel, parishes and so forth were concerned.
So it was combining 2 parishes. Correct. Really, wasn't it? Into one.
Yeah. That led to a lot of confusion. Even members at one end of the parish knew very little of members of the other new parish. They had their own backgrounds, traditions and so forth. So they felt a lot of that pain and pressure. Maybe there were some things that combined us. Ruth will tell us about her difficulties on the day we unpacked our goods, and we had helpers there to meet us and to shift heavy things and so forth as the removalists came. Each of these 3 people in particular, the men in particular, name began with R.
Yes, there were 3 of them there, and they all looked the same again to me. They were farmers, and I had no idea which congregation they belonged to. One was Roy, one was Ron, one was Ray. And I said to Arthur after, I said, but who are they representing? They're not all from this one, but where were they? And yeah, I thought I'll never get this right either. But of course that all worked out. And I think Arthur loves to tell the story about being there on that particular day. The ladies were going to bring lunch, but the men decided we need a cup of coffee already. And these are great farmers. Guess what? They got no milk because the ladies haven't brought the milk in yet. So one of the farmers said he was so embarrassed he had to go up to a local little store and buy some milk, because usually they had it at home and they would just bring it. So that was our first introduction again of we've never been in a parish that had a lot of dairy farmers. This is the first time, I would say, wasn't it? And just while you're on that, there were a few other experiences of farmers ringing you up very early in the morning, forgetting what the time is, about 5:30 or whatever, and one of the ladies is out in her vineyard or somewhere out in the fruit trees, and she suddenly thought the pastor might like some peaches or whatever she's picking, so she rings up. Oh, I forgot the time, I'm sorry. And daylight is much earlier up here in Queensland, we found, so that was interesting. But
yeah, I guess I could mention that for the last few months before I had that call to McLagan, Goombungee.
While you're still in Tasmania.
Still in Tasmania. I was really struggling to have enough energy for all sorts of things, and I was under medical inspection, let's say, to see what was really causing what, and hadn't really come to any big conclusion. And it was only after I arrived up here, and I was told, and very, very early, within a few weeks of being here, you need heart surgery, or you need a mitral valve replaced. And that was a little bit hard to take, I guess, for me, when thinking we were actually just visiting people for the first time, and then to tell the leaders, look, I'm sorry, but I'll have to take some weeks off, not far down the track.
But of course that was the result of your rheumatic fever. That was the end result of it, that you needed surgery.
So it took a while before it all happened, but I remember the friendships that had already formed, so that at the time I had heart surgery, and you folk were able to, or the folk up in the parish here, were willing to give me 3 months off. Some other folk I met, how did you manage to get 3 months off? I said, hospitality and care of people. But some of the folk that we talked to just again a few days ago were very helpful and supportive. One of them made a house available, a new house that they were just finishing down on the beach. And they had a
place called Beachmere, isn't it?
Beachmere. And they hadn't even lived in it themselves, but they said, you can use it for the 3 months, that's okay. So that was very gracious. And I was only there for a short while before a number of folk came to visit from up in the parish here. That was really appreciated too at that time, and we're still friends, and probably accounts for some of the hilarities that still go on today, including some of the pranks that happen.
And perhaps we'll let Lynn tell that part of the story, the one.
I remember the day we played a prank on Pastor Arthur. Or did he play a prank on us? See what you think. Ruth had been away visiting Martin in America, and it was the day before her return. I rang Arthur in the morning before our reading service to ask him if it was okay for me to do some photocopying before our church service. Estelle Janetsky and myself both needed to use the photocopier that morning, so after unlocking the back door to get into the manse, we discovered an unlikely sight in the lounge room and kitchen. A lounge chair was tipped over, there were empty stubbies, bottles of port and a metho bottle, and empty glasses, and a general disarray in both rooms. After the initial shock, oh no, Pastor Arthur has a drinking problem, we realised he was playing a prank on us. Mind you, he thought we were going to get up to mischief, so he thought he would beat us to it. Of course, we had no intention of doing anything, but now it was payback time. First of all, we found the phone number for Alcoholics Anonymous and left it on the kitchen bench, and then we short-sheeted his bed. Estelle and I were about 10 minutes late for church that morning, and we didn't let on to anyone what we had been doing. We both received anonymous phone calls the next morning by a rather drunk man.
Thank you, we don't have to try and tell that one, that's good.
That's great.
Arthur can tell the part about the, you know, when you had to cover yourself with that letter. You told us you put that in the drawer in case you had a car accident.
Yes. In case somebody came into the manse.
But we had no intentions of doing anything, and I just can't believe that he thought so lowly of us.
But he was sure you would, and you jumped to the occasion, wasn't it good?
Yeah, but he started it.
As they've shared since then, these two girls that one of the things was short-sheeting the pastor's bed. They'd never done anything like that, and they've never done anything since.
Never thought of doing
it. So that spoke of good relationships. But then they were the same people when they celebrated your birthday after that episode. Do you remember what they did there?
Well, I think you know better, remember it better than I do, but I was amazed anyhow.
That they wrapped up box after box after box with lovely gift paper, and what was in them? Nothing but empty beer bottles. And you were holding them up there. So they thought again, they turned the tables on the pastor, but it was all good fun. And so that was part of that parish, was a feeling of good relationships. And yeah, and I think, as I said once before, that I think it was a time again where we helped people more seeing the Christian faith as a relationship with their God and a relationship with people, and I think that's what we appreciated together. So there you go.
One thing I forgot about when I jotted down these notes, and some of these folk reminded me of just a couple of days ago, is that someone came to the church at Colpi, I think it was, during the week, and they find me just waking up after sleeping on the pew. This was on I don't know, a Tuesday or something like that. So what's he doing here and sleeping here? But that was all part of it, part of my lack of energy problem, and again, part of the kindness of folk to recognise, yeah, he needs sleep too.
Well, there were 3 points to the parish, so there was a lot of travelling again, and I think we both said that as we were getting closer to the 65 mark, when you were going to retire, we'd think in the car, oh, do we have to drive again? And so on, and it's sort of, you just felt, you know, it was getting time to look forward to retirement from that parish then too.
And I guess one of the early impressions we made when we were here is someone says, where's the program? Or what did they call the program? Where's
the plan?
The plan.
I need the plan, Pastor. Where's the plan?
And
2 days after we got there.
So then I began to realise that this is a new parish, there are new timetables for service, they had this sort of consideration for each other. We will keep moving. One Sunday we'll have 9 o'clock, one day we'll have whatever, 10:30 or 11 or something.
Kept changing.
And then the next week it would be a different
plan,
combination of services. So I needed the plan as well as they did as to when services would be held.
Yes.
And there's still a few congregations I noticed up here in Queensland are doing the same thing.
We didn't ever feel it's a good thing to grow a church, to keep changing your time. But they saw it the other way, because some didn't like 9 and some didn't like 11, whatever it was, so they shared it out. So that was the reasoning behind it.
And milk and cows had to come in between somewhere.
Yes.
Every day, twice a day.
And I think you found too, if you wanted to catch some of these farmers, the best time was to go around 9 o'clock in the morning, because by then they've been out for several hours, 5 o'clock milking, doing things, and here it was breakfast time. And I guess that was also another insight for you, how some people can eat very large breakfasts, big steaks, big ham, eggs, bacon, whatever. And that was especially in the Goombungee area there. So that was interesting.
So when I suggested, you know, would it be any help if I called on you during the week at
night or something,
afternoon or evening, come around for breakfast in the morning at about 9.
Yeah, that'll do. Okay. And so this is the parish where you celebrated 40th anniversary of your ministry and 40th wedding anniversary. And as we've noted, the whole family was together at that time, even Martin and family from the States. And we ended up at Forest Glen, a resort centre, I guess it is, on the Sunshine Coast. And that was a highlight, and a wonderful time to have all these little units next to each other and all our families there from Tasmania and South Australia and America. And that was a highlight. It was wonderful.
Probably haven't said much about Goombungee at this stage. One of the things that the amalgamations of congregations, the parish, made possible the little congregation at Douglas that closed. They made their church available to be shifted to Goombungee and became part of the Goombungee church plant, from which a new kindergarten activity was formed.
Called the Little Folks Groups, they call it. And that's still there to this day, functioning, and we were just told the other day it's got a full quota that they can take.
Yeah.
And it's in behind the church, it's a part of the church setup. And for some time I was very involved in assisting the person running that group, and then on the committee too. So that was a good experience for me there at that time. And that's also the place at Goombungee where we had our daughter Jan and Dave visiting from South Australia, and when we looked in the bedroom as we went past, they were sleeping on the floor because they said the beds had bows in them and we needed new beds. So we figured when your children have to sleep on the floor because the beds are uncomfortable, it's high time to buy some new mattresses. And the interesting part for us to buy mattresses locally there, it was the undertaker who ran the furniture store. And so he comes to your door with your new beds and so on. So all new experiences.
He didn't deliver them in the hearse.
Not in the hearse, no.
But it was sort of a reminder of those sort of connections of fitting beds in a vehicle.
I think one of the lovely stories in the McLagan end of the parish was where this, I suppose he was 40, wasn't he? Yes, this bachelor, and he just said to Arthur one day he wanted some reference, or he wanted something because he was going to America on a holiday with his sister, and they travel over there and go all around, but they also did some tripping in Canada, and they're on a train or a bus somewhere, and this gentleman of 40 meets a lady of 40, and her name was Margaret. And to cut a long story short, these two get married, and Margaret has lived with her husband in Australia now for the last, let's say, 16 or so years, and she was just an absolute joy to listen to at times, the culture shock when her husband-to-be took away out in the countryside where there's nothing around, and Margaret had been in a big high-rise building in the middle of Chicago, and she found some of those things very strange and told some wonderful stories. But on the other hand, she was a breath of fresh air in that congregation and made many touches and changes, and has been a blessing to Mike for the rest of his days. So, and it was a pleasure to meet up with Margaret just briefly again the other day. And I think you found it interesting to be trying to negotiate her with this wedding when she's leaving her country and her Catholic church to marry this man and become a Lutheran in Australia. So there were some interesting parts attached to that too.
One of the other interesting stories, this is the Goombungee end, is that I guess they had been used to fairly formal church services, and it seemed it seemed to be the time to introduce something that was a little more informal, a bit more relational, and they agreed to try an evening, we'll call it a service, but they probably didn't, an evening of fellowship, of doing some things in drama form.
Yes, new songs, lots of singing,
and
singing group.
I think that helped some folk. Others found it hard to adapt to changes of that nature.
And I think you reminded the other day too that it was in our time that they were game to take on some new altogether songbooks eventually, and a new what do you call those pianos, digital piano type of thing, and eventually the old foot pump organ was moved out, and there were some big changes there. So all in all, it was a great time in our last parish. And I don't know, the other thing I was going to say, during that time is when we bought a house in Wine Drive in Toowoomba.
That's in Wilsonton, Toowoomba, yes.
In with Dave Price, our son-in-law. He had half enough money to do that, and we had half enough, so we put it together and we bought this rental property. And for some years, that's the way we paid off the loan, and it was rented out, etc. And eventually when we retired, or when Arthur retired, and we needed to buy a home, which we did in Tasmania, then Dave and Jan bought us out. So I think it was a real blessing that we were able to do that, which enabled us then to buy a house in Tasmania. Yeah.
So just summing up, I think as the last parish that we were to serve in until I reached the age of 65, at which time we were more or less expected to retire anyhow. But it was a blessing to serve in a place like that. I think it was a very helpful time, especially where there were a few considerable pressures initially. And I'd certainly encourage these folk to keep working and to work gladly as so many of them have together over the number of years.
I think you want to say one thing though, that's where you experienced 7 years of drought. In when you came there, it was drought stricken, and it remained that way till we left. And you were involved on a community basis, on a drought committee, and then also with other churches to coordinate prayer times for praying for rain.
Work together on the one hand with the councils, to which I went a number of times as they wanted to talk over how we can best help the most needy in the community, and at the same time to keep in touch with the congregations, or keep the congregations in touch with what the community or church or district council are thinking and doing. So they were growing experiences that I appreciated, and I sense in many ways were appreciated too, that I thank them for those things.
But it was a stressful time for the people, if you remember.
Yes.
And the one thing though, the farmer, the dairy farmer said they learned different ways of farming and what they could feed their cattle on, and that involved using the seed pods of cotton, the cotton that people grow, and that was good cattle feed that they didn't know before. Sometimes you would see a big truck come out and it's got all the leftover vegetables from the big supermarkets, and they just tip it out, and the cows would come up. And then one lady was telling the story one day on their farm how there was some broccoli, you know, which looks very nice and green, but it's a little bit not quite right for selling or for export, and so this whole lot came out, and at the beginning she said the cows would walk up to it, sniff it and walk away, but soon came back and they ate it as well. So yeah, so there were a lot of learning things in there, and you just saw the quiet godliness of a lot of farmers who just battled on from day to day, I guess, knowing that there is a God and all of that. And you had some very sad funerals in that area of a young man who dies of drugs, another young child who got caught in farm machinery just before you were there, so ministering to people like that. So there are a lot of things you could remember in that way too. As you finished.
It was a time of stress for young and old in many ways.
And you used to always say you didn't know which way the water flowed, because you'd drive on these country roads and there'd be a marker in there saying how high the water is. You didn't ever see where it was, which way it went, in our whole time that we were there.
Very little.
Yeah, and I guess the people were trying to explain to us what it could be, and you had no idea really. And I remember when you were first there coming from Tasmania, where even the heat is much less than in this parish, and they were doing something over the church and you walked over there without a hat. And there were a few comments about that. This pastor better go get himself some covering or you will be sizzled. And I must admit, I remember you look so much fairer than most of them. So they were trying to look after you. So I think that about ends our time in Goombungee at 1996. A very, yeah, interesting time. And then we'll go a little bit into retirement and what happened.